are going to be talking with Theo, a regular guest on the studio, and we have to say give thanks to the Most High for bringing us far, and to Bless Radio also for providing this platform for us. But we're going to start with a track called African Princess by African Princess, and it's called Ja Children Cry. Here we go.
Children cry. It's been too long slaving in a Babylon, Babylon. It's been too long slaving in a Babylon, Babylon. Time for us all to unite. Time for us all to unite. Come on, my brothers. Come on, my sisters. We've got to fight with all our might. We have been slaving for over 4,000 years to our that children cry. That children cry. We're sure to reach the top one day. We must reach the top, I say. We're sure to reach the top one day. We have been struggling for over 4,000 years to that children cry.
This next track is by Abakush.
We are Bakush, come to rock you. We are Bakush, come to shock you now. We are Bakush, come to rock you in a true ten rock. In a true ten rock. In a true ten rock. Behold, like the angels sing. Kush, kush, abba, abba, kush.
This one's Sharon Little, Don't Mash Up Creation.
Listen to me, brothers, you to my sisters. He made our creation. Don't want no destruction, oh yeah. So don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nations. Let me tell you, don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nations. Man to man remains unjust. You just can't check for who to trust. Searching, searching through the devil's band. You must can't find at least one good man. So don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nation. Let me tell you, don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nation. Traveling here and traveling there, you meet a lot of strange folks everywhere. Not seeing in and seeing out, you got to hold on firm and try to find out. So don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nations. Let me tell you, don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nations. Traveling here and traveling there, you meet a lot of strange folks everywhere. Not seeing in and seeing out, you got to hold on firm and try to find out. So don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nations. Let me tell you, don't mash up creation. Build it up and save our nations. Please don't mash up creation. We've got to build up our nations. Please don't mash up creation. We've got to build up our nations. to my sisters, give it up creation.
Yes, this is Bonington Judah and Babylon Systems and Dub. This one goes out to Beacon. Hope you're having a great night.
Cause this Babylon system out ya, go to birth. You can see this Babylon system falling, and your children them calling. Africa we want to go. You see this Babylon system set the traps. No way you and I drop in a that. Cause we know King Selassie on the top, and we know that lightning bout the clock. And now sadly each day. Worldwide crisis and everyone can see what's happening every day. Why can't you put some love in your heart for Jah? Why can't you put some love for the Most High? You can see this Babylon system falling, and your children them calling. Africa, we want to go. See the system, forget about the people and all the trials and tribulation. Look how much things are happening surely on your left. Stand firm, judge your children, and see the wicked ones get better. And I say this Babylon system out here, out to birth, out to birth. And I say this Babylon system out here, out to birth, out to birth. And I say this Babylon system out here, surely out to birth, out to birth. All the things they've done each day, them bound to birth, bound to birth. And I say this Babylon system out here, bound to birth. And I say this Babylon system out here, surely bound to birth.
You're in tune to bless me.
You see this system, forget about the people and all the trials and tribulation. Look how much things are happening surely on your left. Why can't you put some love in your heart for Jah? Why?
This one is by Christine Miller and it's called Zion Bound and it's going out there to Tasha.
Now what do you see around you every day? Poverty bringing misery to the lives of those who are already struggling, creating a minority. It is time to put your visions before you and make them a reality. For now is not the time to saturate and while away. It is time for activity. Climb on board if you're Zion bound. Better hurry, seats are going quick. Climb on board if you're homeward bound. Seats are going quick. If you're homeward bound, seats are going quick. Climb on board if you're Zion bound. Seats are going quick. Draw up your plan. You know what is needed. Just travel and you will see for yourself if the road that lies ahead is where you will plant your tree. That road, it may be hard, but no harder than in Babylon. We all know the history, so do not delay, for you hold the key to free yourself. So free yourself. Come on board if you're Zion bound. Better hurry, seats are going quick. Climb on board if you're homeward bound. Seats are going quick. If you're homeward bound, seats are going quick. Climb on board if you're Zion bound. Seats are going quick. Traveled and you have seen for yourself the road that lies ahead, where you planted your tree. Come on board if you're Zion bound. Better hurry, seats are going quick. Climb on board if you're homeward bound. Seats are going quick. If you're homeward bound, seats are going quick. Climb on board if you're Zion bound. Seats are going quick.
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio. Bless Radio.
Well, greetings, greetings. We're back here with Brother Theo in the studio with myself, Sister Lil, on Bless Radio. For those of you who are not getting us on the FM, it's www.blessradio.org. Today we're going to be talking about a building block of lives, and that building block is sacred geometry. And the reason why we're talking about sacred geometry is because the universe is infinite. It has no beginning and there is no end. What is sacred geometry? How can it help your life? So the term sacred geometry refers to various shapes and forms that have been used traditionally in art, architecture, meditation for thousands and thousands of years. These same shapes and forms are also found in natural organisms throughout the entire universe. So sacred geometry can appear, I guess, somewhat esoteric, but a basic understanding of sacred geometry can provide anyone with a helpful way of viewing our world that you can use in your own life. So the ancient cultures, like including Christians, Hindus, Greeks, Egyptians, to name a few, recognize that certain patterns of geometric shapes are repeated throughout nature. For instance, the cells of a honeycomb are hexagon, or a snail shell is like a spiral. And these common patterns and shape come to be known as sacred geometry. They are also bit further broken down into like various numbers, so like mathematical formulas and specific symbols that the ancients believed were the building blocks for everything in the universe, because their patterns were so prevalent and repetitive in nature. And that's just not in, as I'm saying, not just in one area of the globe, it was found across the globe. So it's found that they're like molecular shapes that form the basis of life are in fact the same patterns identified as ancient cultures as like vibrational energy, vibrational frequency are manifesting the shapes. So knowledge of these sacred symbols and mathematical formulas allow the construction of many. So people look at that and they constructed many of the historic buildings. They've been a benchmark to refer to do the architectural work, such as, say, the Great Pyramids of Kemet, or the Greek Parthenon, and the intricate temples found. You'd find them throughout, like South and Central America. So what is spirituality and geometry? You look, Brother Theo, like you'd like to interject. I see you moving back and forth in that chair.
Okay. Well, first of all, just a good evening to all of the Bless FM listeners and everything. Once again, it's my privilege and pleasure to be on your show.
You're very welcome.
Hopefully, provide some insight into this rather involved kind of subject that we're just discussing here. So, just to kind of take up the baton from you and then talk about the whole idea of sacred geometry. So it's pretty much really recognized to represent the universal language of what describes nature in all its intrinsic forms and possibilities. See, because everything that occurs in nature is fundamentally based on these intrinsic patterns and expressions. But however, the additionally to that is that you see these fundamental intrinsic forms are the core archetype, and all other expressions and creations are more or less based upon that archetype without necessarily being the archetype themselves. So they are it's instances which represents that there's a whole variety of possibilities and permutations and formations within nature, which, like as you said, because creation, the universe, or however we like to refer to it, is infinite in its nature. So there is no real beginning to get to and no end to really kind of like accomplish getting to. Then those formations are necessarily going to be infinite in themselves. So that's my first offering there.
Thank you. So, yes, it is the benchmark, should you say, the foundation of all things. So, higher frequencies of energy and awareness are transmitted through the sacred geometry. And it reveals that there are mathematical or abstract patterns between everything that we see, as Brother Theo was just saying, within the physical world. So, how might this relate to, I guess, ourselves, of integrating science and spirituality? And that's one of the questions. How do we incorporate this into our lives to actually have a more wholesome experience? And there are several significant shapes and numbers within this. So, for example, the sphere. The spheres, we're just going to run through some of the shapes that people refer to as sacred geometry. So the sphere is considered a container, so it holds all forms, and it represents oneness, inclusion, integrity, and all the measurements are equal in a sphere. So planets, seed cells, atoms, they're all spheres. And then there's the circle, and it's two-dimensional representation of the sphere, and it's thought to show the unity and total completeness of the universe. And you know, it's one of the most common shapes in nature, and that you see everywhere. It's the circle. There's also the point, so the center of this sphere or circle contains a point, and all measurements either begin or end at the point, so it's associated with the beginning and the end of any type of creation. Then there's spirals. You can get flat spirals, 3D spirals, spirals off to one side or the other, and that symbolizes expansion and growth, and therefore it symbolizes infinity. Then the toroids, and the torus looks like I guess a donut, or the inner tube of the donut. And the round sides, because they're perfectly circular, and it considers it to be a primary shape in all existence. So, for instance, the 7 primary muscles in the heart form a torus. There's the Vescia Piscis. It's Latin, so and it's not got a very attractive meaning, which is bladder of a fish. It's the almond shape that's formed at the intersection of 2 circles of the same size, when their centers are touching. And the circles represent the joining of, the initial fertilization stage of anything. So sperm and egg, it doesn't have to just be humans, it could be any living thing, leading to creation. And it also represents common ground or a sacred vision between people. So it's, for example, in Christianity, it would symbol Christ. And then we have Platonic solids. So the Platonic solids are a group of 3-dimensional shapes. I think there's 5 of them in total, and each one is made up of equal sized faces, such as I guess like a pyramid shape with 4 equal faces, And the 5 platonic solids are, would you like to say that first again?
All right, so
Can
you're
you tell us
giving
a
me
tongue
that. You're
twister?
giving.
Go on.
So yeah, so we got the five platonic solids. They are no particular order: tetrahedron, and then of course there's the hexahedron, an octahedron, a dodecahedron, and the isosahedron.
So we'll start from the top, and I'll just run through quickly how many faces that has. So the tetrahedron was the first one that Theo said, and that's 4 faces in a pyramid shape. The next one is hexahedron,
That's the one, yeah.
and it's 6 faces in a cube. And the octahedron has 8 faces, and the
Dodecahedron.
has 12 faces.
The isosahedron.
Has 20 faces. So the ancients believed that these 5 shapes symbolized, our elements. So fire, earth, air, spirit, and ether. All ether, sorry, and water. And these are the only 5 3-dimensional shapes that can be made with equal sized faces. And they're called platonic solids. Yes, I know it's a Greek word, but upon further investigation, I bid you all to please, if you're interested in this area of the building blocks of our very life existence, so if you're interested in it to do further research, more in depth, because today I guess we can only give you a kind of overview of what this is entailing.
Yeah, so we're doing the primer today, so there might be, keep us informed if there's
Part 2,
if further investigation uncovers the pre Greek terminologies for these basic structures in nature. So that's, but then at this point we have to proceed and work with what we have.
Yeah.
So,
But if there is any listener out there who knows what that would be, please do call in on 079 333 313 66, because we are here to teach each one and teach. So sharing information is definitely a progressive move forward into understanding the very existence of us all on this plane. So Metatron's cube, for example, if we look at areas like in Judaism, this is considered to be the angel who guards God's throne. The figure of a Metatron's cube has been considered sacred for millennia. So all 5 of these platonic sounds are found within solids are found within the cube. So that's why it's thought to be one of the building blocks of creation, or containing the building blocks of creation, because it's all the formulas that build the layers up until you get to the end point. So, I mean, this ancient symbol really is found throughout many of the global cultures. Like, we also find things like the modern term for one of the symbols is like the flower of life, and it's represented by multiple evenly spaced circles overlapping each other to form a flower-like pattern. So you'll have the central circle and then the other circles on the outside of it going around the middle one in order to form that pattern. And they just overlap and keep building on each other until you have a manifestation of a form. So to explain, for example, so let's take our language, for example, and I'd say the English language itself is like a symbol. So we have, say, the vowels A, E, I, O, U are in almost every word we write and say. So it's a bit like this for the universe. It also has its own alphabet and its own symbols and therefore, like Theo said just earlier, its own language. And when you, for example, look at the Ankh, the cross, the Ankh cross, the flower of life, the Kaaba, it's a universal alphabet that allows the universe to communicate. So it communicates through these mechanisms. And at the core, you would say that these 5 platonic solids would in fact be the building blocks of life. What would you say to that, Theo?
What I wanted to focus on, aside from that, was that when it comes to the whole idea and the vast study, which is now known as sacred geometry. So there's a kind of subdivision or interrelated aspects of the whole idea of sacred geometry. So this is something that, as you mentioned, the ancients had already kind of like developed a pretty much vast body of knowledge about it. And aside from that, then of course, what I was trying to really express is how it really had its kind of practical applications and the way in which it was useful to people. So within the whole vast field of sacred geometry, you have the organic or bioharmonic geometry, which pretty much breaks down to geometry of nature, and all aspects of sacred geometry are both examine it from a states of quantitative states and also qualitative states, because we're not just talking about shapes, we're more or less talking about qualitative, like qualities of actually being in those kind of states. So for example, to make myself a little more clearer, it would mean that, say for example, if this kind of knowledge then allows people to recognize the medicinal value of a plant, you see, because that deep knowledge of the sacred geometry then translates into recognizing the patterns and qualities that form a species of vegetation that would be beneficial to one's health. You see, this is how deep the study of it actually goes, you see. So, and on top of all of that, there's what's known as archetypical geometry, and that looks at what is the self-organizing force of creation, and that also relates to the fact that in an interdimensional sense, it functions on all levels of creation. Nothing is exempt from it in terms of really understanding the world and universe around us as it relates to sacred geometry, because it permeates every single thing, every organism, every state, and every molecule is all part of that scheme.
Yeah, because if you look at humans at a base level, you have an atom, and then it has particles like tiny strings, and they dart around or zigzag around all over the place from one area to the other, quite darting fast across, and they collide with each other and then start to create the platonic solids, for example the cube and others that we were talking about, which are the building blocks of our reality. And this happens across the board of all living things: your soil, your trees, your flowers, your grain, your humans, your animals, it's everywhere. So it is like being within our own matrix, I suppose, because of the shapes and the forms. Just to make it more explanatory for those that have just come into or just hearing this for the first time, there are many of you who would have already understood or understand this information, but there are several who don't. And I guess those avatars are symbols that incorporate all 4 elements of nature For example, like the Makaba, it's the flower of life, the Star of David. Like we're saying, the avattoirs, and each element each avatar. It would represent an element, so intellect or a different type of energy, and they are used within ancient cultures, and I guess perhaps sometimes in this generation also by people who are energy workers to actually draw in on that particular expression and bring it out into their energy fields for healing. So, for example, if you've got an allergy or a phobia, or if you've got low moods or things like this, then this can be through the work of somebody who is trained. They can work with you in order to harness these energies so that you can actually start to benefit from being more in tune and more in harmony with the netta.
Yeah, or what I was going to actually say was that just going back to when you mentioned the how it reflects itself in what we, just for example, you mentioned the tree there, so but we recognize the tree, but then also another expression of that, which sometimes can be overlooked when we're looking at the whole idea of the sacred geometry, is because to go beyond the idea of merely looking at shapes, which is actually quantitative, to qualities, which is like, for example, the color of the leaves themselves is a reflection of it, because that's a that's a form of fluctuation in the vibration of that whole geometric design that creates what we then perceive as the color of those leaves. So all of that there, when I was saying earlier on, nothing escapes it because everything is within that whole idea. Your field of awareness then will then have to be tuned into all of that to recognize all of those qualities and quantities there, and that is what really plays the huge role in understanding what we like to call life itself for us, and the way in which we navigate through it.
Yes, because what you're talking about, what we're talking about more to the point, is vibrational frequencies manifesting as different forms. So they've been identified as shapes, but it is energy in frequency form. So that's why we can recognize the vibrational frequencies, and those shapes change on a base level depending on what it is exposed to or what you program yourself with. So, it's something to, when you start looking at it and how it can really be helpful and benefit from it in a progressive and productive way. But before we go on, we're going to give you a little break, and this is a track by Mikey General, and the song is called Teach the Children.
It's up to me and you. It's up to me and you. It's up to me and you. Yeah. What you gonna teach the children? What you gonna teach the youth? What you gonna teach the children? Are you gonna tell them the truth? Hey, so what you gonna teach the children? What you gonna teach the youth? Hey, what you gonna teach the children? Are you gonna tell them the truth? Teach them about love, life, liberty, justice and equality for all of humanity. All of humanity. Cause we don't have any option. We have to keep them from corruption.
truth. Whoa. What you gonna teach the children? What you gonna teach the youths? What you gonna teach the children? Are you gonna tell them the truth? Set an example by the life you live.
A free spirit, a free mind. Free mind, free mind. Traveling through the universe in this your time. Free spirit, free spirit. Given to I and I by the powers of the Father Most High. Jah, Jah. There is a place for everything. For everything. For everything has a place. Has a place. You got to open up your mind. Open your mind. So you can be truly wise. Full joy, the gift of life, the gift of life. Full joy, the gift of life, the gift of life. Break down all the barriers.
This one is G Vibes and it's called Full of Joy Life.
There is no limitation. You can reach up high. Have no fear, you can do it. Your destiny, your soul. For there's a place for everything. Cause everything has a place. You got to open up your mind. So you can be truly wise.
Yes, a joyful life is what we would all like to have. A very joyful life, full of good vibes, definitely. And the other track prior to that was Mikey General Teach the Children on 7 inch, and that's a wonderful track about like what are we going to pass on? How are we leading by example for the youth to follow? What examples are they looking up at? So for those of you who've just joined us, we were talking about sacred geometry. We just went over some of the core principles of geometry, but not. We did a kind of synopsis. I mean, for further research, there's a lot of information and some wonderful books about how sacred geometry was used within Kemet and other parts of our ancient world. So, as I was saying, the ancient ones, and perhaps in these times by trained energy workers, they utilize a way to heighten, as I was saying earlier, these elements, and by using them to magnify, like pulling the element of air, earth, water, fire, so pulling the emotions of intellect or, for example, action. So the symbols are magnified, giving you the ashe to make things happen, so it can be utilized through healing, so onto nature's first patterns of life to alter how those things are vibrating on a frequency level. And it connects the 12 base circuits in the human body, and geometry is associated with the 5 main elements: earth, fire, water, and ether, which are the first 5 classical states of matter, the first 5 of geometry, i.e. the cube, which we're all very familiar with. And each of these shapes represents the first 5 elements. So, for example, an energy worker could use these elements to test your system to see, as I was saying earlier, if you have an allergic or an intolerance to something, which we know are 2 separate states. And it can be claimed, and it has been, can be claimed to work to correct those intolerances like food allergies by using the energy systems that run through the body. A bit like what the meridian lines are used, in acupuncture to heal people. So the energy systems that run through your chakras, through those 7 energy centers that run through the main human body, and the energy centers are connected to the endocrine system, which manages everything about us, or as humans if you prefer. So the immune system, the sleep cycle, everything is magnified by these internal organs. And the endocrine glands are the physical representations, I guess, of the chakras, because they're more or less in the same place in the body. And that connects you physically, your physical body, to our energy bodies. And we have, should we say, become quite disconnected. And as a result, many of us are not functioning as the true pinnacles of our true spiritual identity of what we can be. So I'd say geometry would work through the resonance. When we look into the quantum world, for example, a tree, you are not just looking at the tree. It's not just a passive object. It's not just, it's just a tree over there. This tree is also actually looking back at you, as it has a counter resonance between the tree and the person. So there is an exchange of frequencies going on here. And perhaps it's a silent language to yourself. But yeah, a silent language to you, because the tree's not talking back to you in an audible way, but you can feel that energy off the tree, and you can feel that share of that exchange of that frequency. That's why in a lot of ancient cultures within the homeland, we find people saying, talk to the tree. That's why plants, when you talk to them, they can respond to you. They grow quite, lush. when they have communication with us and we send them out positive energy. So there is an exchange going on. Theo, you look like you wanted to say something. To say something there. So, how can sacred geometry? How can it help your life? What's so good about it? We answered that question earlier when we were saying about it being the building blocks of life itself. So, the shapes within sacred geometry are us on a molecular structure, but it's not just us that's like this, it's the entire universe. So all living organisms are connected in this way, and you'll find these patterns repeated across the entire world. So sacred geometry has played such an important role, say, in mathematics and engineering, but what can it do for your everyday life? I guess a greater understanding of sacred geometry can have many benefits. So it can improve your spatial understanding and visual ability. Many projects require an ability to imagine what is needed inside a certain space, such as planning a house, renovation, laying out a garden. So practicing visualizing these three-dimensional shapes and dimensions will help to increase our awareness in those areas. So what can assist with that? So meditation and personal awareness. So mandalas are specific shapes used in various traditions. I mean, you do find that people are drawing this even in art schools here, or just for personal pleasure, as a therapeutic method to relaxation. So mandalas are and they're used to represent the universe and act as aids for us, because we it's not just simply decorating. It has symbols that are meaningful. You can decorate them with symbols that are meaningful to yourself if you want. Place them as reminders throughout your home, so you can put symbols within your own mandala and meditate on this in order to channel that energy or that frequency out there, changing the shape of the environment that you're sending that out into. It promotes a much higher and much greater appreciation of nature and the universe. Once you're familiar with some of the basic shapes, you'll start seeing how they repeat in many places, and also the inspiration it's had for many man-made structures that we see across the entire world. And some fantastic buildings have been put up due to the inspiration of these shapes and the understanding and the awareness of it. I guess it will also then have that domino effect of enhancing your 3D thinking. So if you're somebody who works in graphics or movie production or any other type of design work, an awareness of sacred geometric patterns will help train your brain to see patterns and improve, I guess, your design or 3D skills. Studying the shapes and patterns may give you some great ideas for your next projects. It also engages the whole brain, so the left side of your brain tends to be more logical, technical, whereas the right side of your brain is typically, or is seen as being more creative, the more intuitive side. For most of us anyway. And one side of the brain is usually more dominant than the other. Not in everybody, it's not a golden rule, but it's usually more dominant. And the nature of geometry engages, which is great, both sides of your brain and helps them to work together. And this can make you more effective in life overall if you're firing off both sides of your brain, right and left, and not just using one side more heavily than the other. It's a great exercise to meditate on those, or even to start drawing them, sacred geometry. The Platonic shapes. So what a great way, and a very accessible way for us to access these things, or for those who don't feel inspired to do meditation work with the mandala or any of the sacred geometric shapes, there's always the alternative of working with an energy worker that can assist you and guide you through what to do and how to access those frequencies to help, draw that into your own energy field.
Yeah, I'd just like to contribute in a little bit. So all of that is extremely useful. Additionally, so the thing about it is, what I like to say when it comes down to sacred geometry, whether we're dealing with that specific term, but the whole idea really, which is also useful to remember, that these are all kind of corresponding ideas that is, it encapsulates within the idea of what's called sacred geometry, but they're pretty much, as you was alluding to, they are corresponding ideas to any other kind of field of endeavor you could be involved in. So, for example, then, it then, as you said, intuitively, the more one becomes familiar with this whole idea and not necessarily always be appreciating it as being sacred geometry, it's actually a corresponding recognition of things like, as you said, spatial awareness, and a kind of appreciation that becomes more natural to you, which is absolutely what everyone is aiming for, is to be more natural within themselves, and corresponding to everything else around them being all natural with everything else and everyone else. That's pretty much the whole basic idea of what spiritual awareness and its ultimate aim actually is. And so it's always useful, and it's always relevant, particularly in artistic endeavors, because that whole idea of being able to access and appreciate and consciously recognize sound variation, spatial variation, shadings if you're a painter or a sketch artist, these kinds of seeing the difference in the light shadings if you're a photographer. All of these kind of things are the corresponding kind of situational values, that kind of like bring together the beauty of something and its function. So that's where the whole fundamental idea of what is being referred to as sacred geometry has a corresponding kind of practical reality connection to everything that we're doing. And it can and those are the helpful ways in which you can carry people forward in anything that they're doing, because it works that way.
Absolutely, because the more you become aware of the shapes, the more you'll be able to visualize different things, and it's good for everybody. Definitely, if you're artistic, it absolutely heightens your ability to be more fluid with what you are trying to produce, whether it's a painting, sculpture, piece of jewelry, ceramics, any of the thing. And if you're an architect, well, it just blends so well with understanding the different shapes and how building blocks are. And I guess the more you layer these shapes, the more complex they become. And that's why we see the manifestations of things like ourselves, the soil, and etc., because the building blocks have become quite an exchange of layers and frequencies in a whole capsule of exchangement and interaction, and it's happening everywhere at the same time across the whole world. And that's to show you how interconnected we really are, as just within this sphere, within this universe, we are so interconnected. Because if you think that's on every level of every organism, of your mountains, of your trees, of your sea, of your fish, of your humans, of your baby, of everything, then you can see how we're then you can see how we are all interconnected. on a greater scale and on a spiritual scale, because that is the essence of the building blocks that make our reality what it is. So I'm just going to touch on this quickly, and it's the flower of life symbol, which is considered to be sacred among many cultures around the world, and it's considered by some to well, they say that it's the Akasha records. The flower of life is the modern name given to a geometrical figure composed of multiple evenly spaced overlapping circles. They're arranged to form a flower-like pattern with its six-fold symmetry. It's similar to a hexagon, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, similar to a hexagon, and the center of each circle is on the circumference of the 6 surrounding circles. I mean, you can see this image very easily on any, like, on the internet, or if you go into like metaphysics, physics, you can see these shapes. If you want or would like to do further research on this area. You know, to be honest, we'll never really know for sure whether this geometry was identified first from the observation of natural forms, or whether it came as a result of an intellectual quest by some, individual in some far-off place. But whichever, it's clear that these natural mathematical building blocks began to be used in the design of many of the important, say, man-made structures. So I touched on earlier the word architecture, and it can be seen in the constructions from the ancient world right up to today. And sacred and ceremonial sites were built with dimensions that incorporate these mathematical figures, such as infinite numbers, astronomical, or mathematical constants. I guess I'm talking, what I mean is like pi, or the sacred, the sacred one, pi. And the use of geometry, so for example the Pythagorean triangle, and the application of sacred geometry in our most important buildings is a reflection of the importance that was attached to it. But how early this began to first being realized, this information isn't quite known, because you find it on papyruses and other ancient manuscripts. You find some of these symbols, and so we don't have an exact, even scientists, they don't have an exact time as to when it all began, or when the realization began of the building blocks of our world, and how it's all come together on a core level.
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to, you mentioned the architecture, the thing about that is that the basic principle of the sacred geometry that we're talking about is that it dictates that every form is unique in its nature.
Absolutely.
and as such is actually just more or less an approximation of the mathematical principle on which it's based. So the result of that means that any kind of form is going to kind of have to kind of be circumscribed within certain constraints in order for it to be effective. So those who pretty much unearthed those principles at some stage, I'd imagine, I can't even really say for sure, I'd imagine that there's a combination of the observation and the experience of the reality of those constraints and those forms, as well as further investigation in terms of the intellectual quest. So there's probably a concurrent kind of effort involving both what's revealed naturally and then further investigation upon it to build upon those principles, and then the result is,
Yes.
very kind of monumental structures that, particularly in Kemet, which endure to this day, while other civilizations have, made their attempts and not quite managed to achieve the same kind of longevity in their structures. So, and there's obviously, the Great Pyramids are still a source of fascination the world over, and
they're a source of fascination because they've used their principle of natural law that exists within our dimension. And I think using and drawing upon nature as your reference point, or well, from what we see in history, it always leads you to wonderful manifestations, as we've seen within architecture, within so many things. I mean, you look around and you see within all living organisms, life itself. Is a fascination at the complexity of those building blocks and the layers that have gone into them in order to come up with this structure. It takes very intelligent minds.
Not only that, but it's also, we can say, I just want to say, additional to saying intelligent minds, that was actually, you have to say that there was a spiritual elevation involved in all of that, because the structures themselves, were designed to denote that level of spirituality, in that they were meant to reflect, to as close as possibly the infinite nature of creation. That was that was the whole kind of the whole idea, I suspect, of read as much, because the whole idea was that we endure through nature. There is no end, there's no beginning. It's only transformation of energy. So these structures were meant to endure, because at that moment, that ancient culture, our ancestral cultures didn't, of course, they didn't envisage that Kemet would then be run over by the marauding hordes from Asia and everywhere else. But then that was the design was for that, with envisaging that reality of enduring infinitely.
Well, what they did was get to the core principle of life itself, and as we can see across the whole world, as I was saying for those who've been listening from the beginning, is that it's in everything. So, for example, the energy of the Most High is running through all living things. Isn't it energy that we need for those shapes, those platonic, those elements to move around, the frequency, the energy of it?
First, well, if we look from the standpoint that the shapes themselves are energy,
yes.
and
exactly.
then the whole infinite range of possibility is then for those who tap into that knowledge to then extract and extrapolate that meaning in order to harness it. So that's
what I'm
that's
talking
where
when
it
I
goes.
say energy workers. Yes, absolutely. So Theo just hit the nail on the head to the point why I was saying about energy workers. I have the capacity, the ones who are trained in their field and know exactly how to harness the energy through whatever methods they use, and pull that energy to give you the ashe, as I was saying earlier, to go forward. Even used to help remove intolerances, allergies. It's all at arm's length, but we are taught in a different method that doesn't allow us to appreciate the nature and actually have an understanding of the environment and the world that we live in, and what we've been born into, what our spirits have come into. Once we have more of an understanding of that, then we also understand words like love. What does it really mean to love then, if we're all interconnected on this level? Other areas. What does it mean to forgive then, if we're all interconnected on a cellular level? The elements. frequencies and the energies bending according to your projections. So that means that we, because we are a living organism and have intellectual thinking, we have the capacity to think and reason out things. We also have the capacity to change how we are thinking and therefore affect the energy and the frequency, the vibration that we ourselves are giving out, and therefore affect everything else around us. And that's why it's important to understand how sacred geometry works in order to have an understanding of concepts of love, concepts of forgiveness, concepts of these sorts of areas of life and emotions that are represented by the shapes or the tectonic shapes and within geometry. So it's about it all being intertwined. Tectonic solids. Getting ahead of myself there. Oh well, we're all human, aren't we? Yeah, so as I was saying about it's all being interconnected, and the need to understand how it works, the sacred geometry, so that, as I'm saying, we can then start to decide, if we feel ourselves going off balance, it's about us to learn how to realign ourselves in order to project a good frequency so that we maintain an equilibrium most times. As I was saying, we're all human, so we can't say all times, we have to say most times.
Yeah, to follow on from that, I wanted to, I always tend to go back to something you was mentioning earlier, because that usually triggers off my responses. So what I wanted to slightly deal with was the nature of the word sacred in the whole geometry thing. That word there, deserves a little bit of attention in there. So
yeah, because I do feel that word doesn't really give justice to what is really happening. It's a bit more than just sacred, because people in this day and age, when you think of sacred things back in time, it would be, even religious things would have been sacred, but now it's very flippantly used, and the word is used flippantly.
if you look the word up, then there's constant reference to things held in kind of in a kind of veneration by various kind of religious denominations and expressions and that kind of doctrine. So it gets that reputation of being something that is of religious significance. However, there's more to it than that, really. This information and all of this knowledge really was you can in the sense that we apprehend the idea of religion, then sacred geometry is antecedent to that. It precedes and comes like way before the whole idea of religious veneration of any concept, idea, or even kind of messianic figure. It's all before all of that. But the knowledge. Thought you were signaling to me with that fan. But anyway, so the
Kind of warming you people.
the knowledge that we're talking about nowadays, when we talk about having intellect and being and having this access through books to things, as I understand it, this kind of information would be recorded on entire surfaces. This would be recorded on tablets or scrolls. So by nature, the access to it was going to be limited.
Yes.
So then there were certain levels of knowledge which which would be attained at a certain level by certain people. The sacred nature of it, I suspect I'm having a little bit of a stab at this, and I'm saying, so I'm entrusted with a certain level of knowledge, which then I have to pass on to others. That means I cannot take that responsibility lightly, and I have to really, to use more up-to-date terms, you have to know your stuff. You have to know that inside out. If you're going to pass that on, it's a huge responsibility to pass that on for those who haven't had the opportunity and the access to information to study as in depth as you have. And so those levels, which was known as the priesthood back then the huge responsibility was to really be fully conversant with that idea in order to pass that on, in order for the culture, the society to actually benefit from it. Because to use it in a wrong-headed manner would then, we've seen what religion has done with spiritual precepts. So the sacred nature is that the knowledge itself is venerated, not the mere concept of its religious significance. So that would be the whole idea of it, and that's why we learn at some stage that, especially in Kemet and many cultures in antiquity, and then those who benefited from the information being passed down didn't actually demarcate any kind of distinction between the spirituality and the learning process, the spirituality and the politics and everything else, because that all of that had to be combined in order for the culture to work and flourish, which they did.
Yeah, because before there was a set of learned men or high priests and people of this nature who would dedicate their lives to studying this information that we're relaying here, and then they were the people who would be the ones teaching this information to others in some of those temples. And like Luxor, we know that this was destroyed. Such a great place of learning, and it benefited many of the places on this side of the world, this side of the Atlantic. And it just blends to enabling us to have a deeper understanding of the life that we are living, of the environment that we live in, and how life does work when we're talking about frequencies and energy. It actually goes on a deeper level and enables you to understand how far-reaching those frequencies are. So I'm just going to play you 2 more tracks here, and it's Kiti Roots. It's called Faith in Jah, and that's the first one. Here we go.
Faith can move mountains. Faith can fill fountains. Young push the tempest by. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, 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 oh. Feel like I could climb a mountain, swim the deepest sea. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, 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 oh. I feel like I could climb a mountain, swim the deepest sea. For it is written, who Jah bless, no man curse, no. Put your trust in Him, you shall never thirst, no way. Come along and take a dip in the river of life. Hey, there Jah will make everything alright. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, 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 oh. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, 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 oh. I feel like I could climb a mountain, swim the deep sea. It is written, lean not on your own understanding and strength, no. 'Cause on mankind, but you can never keep him away. Just sent his son to guide I and die. Hey, still the storms raging in our lives. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, 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 oh. I feel like I could climb a mountain, swim the deepest sea. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, 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 oh. I feel like I could climb a mountain, swim the deepest sea. Who Jah bless? No man curse, no. Put your trust in Him. You shall never fall, no way. Come along and take a dip in the river of life. Hey, there Jah will make everything alright. My faith in Jah is so. Oh, oh, oh.
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio. Bless Radio.
if you're twice defeated in the race of life, but with confidence, you've won even before you've started. Be positive in your mind. Don't be negative, all you'll find. Negative thinking will get you downhearted, and you'll be beaten before you start it. Positive approach can open many doors. Set your heart.
This track is called Joy and Happiness. It's Mikey.
Knowing yourself what
Mikey General, Luciano, and Dubbookism all together.
Stumble. I'm begging you, oh God, to make me humble. Let not
This track is by Black Amolo and it's called Forward Ever.
Rise up together, my ghetto youth, wise and clever. Free up yourself and be free forever. Free, no make the system hold ya, not even control ya. Free up yourself and be free from Babylon. Free up yourself and be free from the system. Wicked situation. Hold a meds and hold it up. Hold a meditation. Right up. Higher, higher, higher vibration. Spiritual liberation. Free up my nation. Yeah. Forward ever. We say backward never. In a diggity and fit and strong. Forward ever. We say backward never. In a diggity and fit and strong. Forward ever. We say backward never. In a diggity and stepping forward. In a diggity and never backward. They upon a mission, wise and clever. Rise up together, my brothers and sisters. In a diggity and stepping forward. Never, never backward. They upon a mission, rise up together, my brothers and sisters. Forward ever, we say backward never. In a diggity and fit and strong. Forward ever, we say backward never. In a diggity and fit and strong. Forward ever, we say backward never. In a diggity and fit and strong. Forward ever, backward never. In a diggity and fit and strong.
Yes, that's right. We want to be fit and strong, as Black Amolo was just saying about being moving forward ever. So continually keeping your focus and move forward in the direction that is laid out for you, because we're all here for different missions. So we have a different purpose, each and every one of us. And understanding how sacred geometry works and how it can be useful to you and how it is you also. It's a two-in-one. Having this in your awareness will enable you to deal with things in a different way so that you become more and more connected. You want to be connected to this energy that's running through the entire universe. It is the Creator, the Most High, whichever terminology you prefer. So it's about, as I'm saying, getting in tune, in harmony, understanding how you can utilize sacred geometry and meditation through working yourselves if you're good at drawing. So making those shapes and meditating on them yourself, or having those shapes put into an area of your own home and having that as a meditation point, or going to an energy worker and allowing them to help you work through balancing out your energy throughout your own meridian lines within your chakras, and getting them all in line so that you can actually start to harbour on the elements, earth, as we were saying, air, fire, water, earth, ether, and they're representing different things like intellect, intuition, all those different elements, all those different aspects of our personas. It helps us to draw on those and boost those different sides that, or whichever we want to actually focus on. It's an individual decision, because you know personally how and what you need to work on, or if you have an allergy or intolerance, you can use it in different ways to actually have a more holistic experience.
Essentially. So what I learned about while looking into this is that, you see, sacred geometry is referred to as the natural sanction that unites all life forms. So in that whole statement there is the idea which you've just been really fleshing out there for everyone, is that, you see, the source and whatever that produces the whole makeup and qualitative nature and expression is known as sacred geometry, is this very same thing that has produced yourself. So, and that means more essentially than that, it shows a kind of quality of relatedness between, all unique individuals, all unique organisms, all unique forms. And so it relates to those ideas, which is why ideas like the law of vibration and the principle of Ma'at are so that's why it underscores those ideas, in that it's all really much about, you know, living in harmony with all of that, learning how to live in harmony of all of that, and then embracing the ideas and concepts and practices that assist you in attaining that goal. You see, so that's pretty much the fundamental underlining nature of what sacred geometry represents.
Absolutely. So yes, definitely. Having an understanding, looking into it for yourselves is very interesting. So please do, for those who feel they would like to learn more, look into it. There's some great material out there on sacred geometry, and there are some fantastic energy workers all learning how to meditate through the use of drawing out those shapes and patterns that are throughout nature, and meditating on them yourselves and, you know, just helping yourself to start to clear that space within your energy field, and so that you can draw on more positive things, so that you can start manifesting and being in the true version of yourself, and actually work with the, you know, you'll know how to work with different emotions that come, or different challenges that come along in life, and being able to know how to work those energy fields so that you can start to radiate more positive and draw more positive towards yourself. Is, I guess, an ultimate goal for all of us. Would love that. When you say,
well, yeah, everyone would love that. So aside from the things you were saying, so what it really, you know, what one of the other things that essentially is you know, fundamentally built into the idea of sacred geometry is that, you know, those basic shapes, those basic formations are actually the embodiment of interdependent structure, and then that's, so by that reckoning, then, you know, in order for us to flourish, then we have to recognize the interdependence of all things, of all people. That then leads to fundamentally then influencing the options and choices that you're referring to. It influences all of that, from that way of looking at things, you see. So then it becomes a case of then, like one of the records you played just prior to us resuming here was based on Marcus Garvey's words about having confidence in yourself. So those options, the more knowledge you gain, the more you embrace that idea, then, because essentially what confidence is your assuredness in your ability to carry something out.
So when you feel that you're competent at something,
precisely, you are more confident going into that actual, you know, that actual effort to get it done.
Yep, absolutely. So on that note, we're going to play another track, because I am a little over my time of 10 o'clock. So we will play a track called Joy and Happiness, because I think that's a state that is one that would happen when we have that positive energies and frequencies running through us. So here we go, Joy and Happiness. I've just changed my mind. So, as it goes on radio, I've changed my mind, and I'm going to now play you Boney L, and it's called Rise Up, because I think that's a bit more fitting, actually. So here we go, Boney L and Rise Up. This next one is Robert Dallas and his Visions and Dub.
Just so bless me. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. He lead I to the right direction. I follow his instruction. I see my dreams come true.
This is the last track going out here tonight on the Sista Lil Show, Bless Radio. And I hope you all have a blessed week. Thank you for your ears. And may we all be blessed and have a wonderful weekend to one another. And thank you to Brother Theo for contributing to tonight's show and being with us here tonight on Bless.
Once again, my pleasure. Look forward to the next time, and good night to all the blessed listeners. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
'Cause it's in my vision. He lead me on the right track, and there is no turning back. No, no, no. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I could never let go. I'm holding on strong. I trust and believe in Joe. That's why I not let go. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I work through my vision. He Jah make the decision. He lead us to the right direction. I have to follow his instruction. I see my dreams come true. He make it happen for me and you. It's my vision. It's just vision. I follow his instruction. I will never let go. I not let go, no, no. I don't let go. I would never let go.
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio.
I see my dreams come true. My dreams come true. Just so bless me. I run through my vision. Jah make the decision. I run through my vision. Jah make the decision. He lead us to the right direction. I follow his instruction. I see my dreams come true. He made it happen for me and you. I work through my vision.
I see my dreams come true. He made it happen for me and you.